Hello guys, you're live.
Hi, Martin. Can you hear us?
Yep. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. I think we're live.
Good stuff. Okay. Right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar around toolkits for DevSecOps. These are the two talking heads that will be floating in front of you for the next little bit. I'm the one on the right. I'm Martin. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Uleska. My background, like Gary's, is in software engineering, but also in product management and in cybersecurity at a practical and at a policy level. So Gary is our Chief Security Officer, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Thanks, Martin. Hi, my name's Guy Robinson. Yeah, I'm a techie by background. I was a developer for a number of years and then moved into security. I've been a penetration tester. I've been a security architect over at Citigroup. I've been a board member and conference organizer at OWASP and other things like that. And I'm looking forward to introducing some of the challenges and aspects that toolkits apply to that Martin's then going to cover.
Cool, thanks, Gary. So this is a quick summary of what we're going to cover this afternoon. We're going to start with the main challenges when scaling application security, how to source from the huge range of open source or commercial tools that are out in the market, how to take those tools and build a process around them, a full software development process that meets your regulatory and testing needs, how to use a feature called Ulusco Toolkits to manage those tools and their configuration across your development lifecycle, and then we'll finish at the end with some questions. Just quickly before we get into the detail, throughout this webinar, you'll hear us talk about toolkits from a Uleska perspective. This is a feature that we've just launched. Toolkits are a mixture of a tool and its config. They're packaged together in sort of a reusable unit. You can see on the left-hand side, we've got a couple of toolkits listed out there. One is our official web scanning toolkit, which is a set of dynamic testing tools, SSLIs, Nikto, and Zaproxy, and they are bundled with the right config to act as a good starting point for dynamic testing for all of our customers. And underneath it, you can see that this customer, the customer that we've taken this screenshot from, has created their own custom toolkit where they brought in semgrep, Chekhov, dependency check, Whispers, and SonarQube. So they've created their own collection of tools according to what they need to test for, and they've configured them for their environment and for their level of quality that they're looking to get from that particular test. So we'll get to the details of how we build those towards the end in the demo section. But just a quick summary, when we say toolkits, when we're talking about toolkits, this is what we mean in this context. We mean a collection of tools and their configuration. So over to you, Gary.
So thanks, Martin. Yeah, I get the delight of talking about some of the challenges that toolkits will address. We're quite excited about toolkits. It's been really well received by the industry. And what we want to do here is, instead of just going straight into the UI and showing what toolkits are, is to take a slight step back, understand what are some of the challenges that have come about in the industry, with plenty of companies that then help or make toolkits become a solution that helps people out. So if we move on to the next slide, essentially, the industry has got to a point now where there are a number of different types of security tools that can be applied. Here in this slide, we show them broadly associated with the various aspects of an SDLC pipeline, you know, the coding, the integration, staging, testing, and deployment. But essentially, a security program these days is going to end up being combined of various tools, probably from various vendors or open source, etc., that come together to make an effective assurance process, especially on the automation side. So just as we have here, you know, your static, your code analysis tools, there's plenty of those out there. Some of them are very specific to a particular code language. Some of them are quite good and broad and can handle multiple code languages, etc. But even within that, you've got other types of tools, you know, ones that are going to check for secrets, ones that are going to check for maybe the Kubernetes, etc., when you get down to the infrastructure as code. And what you find is, when you start combining together the various types of security tools, the automation tools you want to provide your assurance, you end up coming into various groupings. Now, we'll discuss here how those groupings can come about, but they can come about with different types of tools. So for example, yeah, your static analysis and infrastructure as code, and maybe your software composition analysis at the early stage, maybe after something's compiled on your platform. And then later on, you might be checking, well, let's do dynamic or IaaS testing. Let's check our cloud components are set up and configured correctly. And we find a lot of people then want to have various groupings of tools. And as Martin said, the configuration that then they can apply and scale out across their various organizations. And just the act of bringing those tools together, the process of building them up and actually growing them over time, and the technical configuration can be a bit of a headache, and that's something we want to address. And also the fact that the different toolkits can come in at different stages. So for example, it might be your containers are actually being developed and checked at a different cadence or a different process to your main development pipeline. Maybe not everything goes to staging testing. Maybe that's done at a different stage as well. So suddenly you're talking about, for one project that might have various test tools ran across its life cycle, there's different groupings within that. And again, toolkits and those sort of features make that a lot simpler. Just as a guidance here, we keep a database of the various tools we're integrating into the platform. And you see here in brackets the numbers of the various types of open source and commercial tools that are popular and out there in the market that you can bring in. And as you can see, you're talking about hundreds of different types of tools depending on what you're needing. So to move on to the next slide, we'll take a different look at the types of tools, because what we're really describing here is we're describing, open source and commercial tools as you would take off the shelf and bring into your system. And here we're looking at sort of what's that pyramid of checks that we can do during a pipeline or a project. Bringing together the commercial and open source tools obviously makes sense. There's also custom checks you'll probably want to do, and even manual checks. And for different organizations, this pyramid will look very differently. So some organizations might be a lot more manual tests maybe happening earlier on, and then it's a lot less open source tools, etc. So how that gets shaped up is interesting to how you then set up your own toolkits. As we see here, again, according to our database, there's around about a 70-30 split between the number of available open source tools versus the commercial tools. And again, depending on organizations and budgets, it will differ how many of those types of tools you're going to be using. One thing to keep in mind, though, is, as we specify here, the custom tests. So we've got a simple example there from the ASPS standard of a type of category of check that probably wouldn't occur in an off-the-shelf tool. So something like verifying the application, has different pages or logic flows to make sure you're not able to skip logic. If you're buying insurance, you can't go straight to the pricing page without choosing the right type of insurance. Imagine that sort of flow. And that's something you're not really going to get in an off-the-shelf tool, something on GitHub or something, from a vendor, something quite specific to yourselves. And in some analysis we have done, depending on the standard, something like ASVS, which has about 280 different types of controls, about 40% of those are typically going to be custom checks. So when you're building your security program, I think it's not just a matter of bringing in certain select off-the-shelf commercial and open source tools, but is eventually going to grow over time to potentially include some custom checks, and especially some custom checks that have maybe been discovered manually during a pen test or during a bug bounty, but can then be easily automated and brought back into your automation program, so that grows over time based on the types of errors that you're seeing. So we move on just to the last aspect in this particular section. We've covered the technicality of the infrastructure as code or dynamic or static testing, etc., and the types of tools. But how does that fit into your culture? How does that actually work day in, day out, when the development, the DevOps, and the security teams want to work together to get an efficient security program? On the left-hand side here, we kind of ask some of the standard questions that then have to be addressed once you've established what tools you want to test with. Simple things like, who is going to be doing this testing? Is this a group of tools that's supposed to be ran by the developers, or is that the job of the security team, or is it the job of automation? what are you testing? Is it the earlier dev branches so a developer can get all that wrapped out before they put it into production or into the main master branch? Or are you only testing your release branches? Or are you doing both, in which case toolkits may differ between that? There's also things, as we'll see in the next few slides, a security automation program is continually changing. It's usually growing, and there's different aspects that come in for different teams. And so how do you handle that type of flux, that type of change? If you've got one or two teams, that's manageable. If you've got 20, 200, 2,000 teams or repos, changing what security tools or profiles you're running suddenly becomes quite a big headache. And it's a headache that's going to hold up your security assurance. And it's actually a headache you don't need to have, because with technology, you can make that simple process of saying, right, we have a new tool we want to check for all our Python projects, or we've got a new check we want to provide in all our containers. Making that as easy as possible and as easy as possible to roll out means that you can get quicker assurance and quicker protection without a whole project being wrapped in behind that. So just moving on to the next slide, what we're going to do is we're going to think about, we now know we need to have multiple tools of varying different types and profiles that's going to make up our security program. But how do we actually get to the point of saying, oh, here's the tools we want to think about, what is it? And then the next slide, the good thing is that many of the maturity models around this area of the industry show that you don't need to try and get it right at the start. What we have here is actually just taking a screenshot from the OWASP SAM maturity model, which used to be called, OpenSAM, and sort of similar to BSIM and SSDF, etc. But essentially what this is focusing on is how to build up and mature your application security program when it comes to the automated testing tool. And just to read it verbatim, the first stream focuses on establishing a common security baseline to automatically detect the so-called low-hanging fruit. So that's what some automated tools are very good at doing, coming in and finding those easy to find issues that just give you that level of assurance that you're not putting those standard mistakes into the production code line. And again, what we want to do is make that as easy as possible to set up and configure. Just reading on, progressively customize the automated tests for each application. So what we're saying there is both from as we've found from a tool point of view, but also from a profile configuration point of view, you'll likely have different profiles for different groups of projects. That's not to say you'll have a toolkit for every project. You may well do, but what we find is that there's typical groupings of projects maybe done by the same teams or the same organization, where toolkits can then apply and be effective for a whole group of projects without having to do it per application. Just going on, just the red section at the top, there's more bugs than the automated process can detect, the more time experts will have to use their knowledge and creativity to focus on more complex attack vectors. And that's what we were talking about earlier on. Manual penetration testing and bug bounties, they will discover other harder to find issues that wouldn't be done by an off-the-shelf tool. However, once you've found that, and we've seen this in practice, you can then take that type of issue, easily script up something in 20 lines of Python to do that repeatable check, that automated check, and package that up and put it back into something like a toolkit as another type of check that's done as part of your feature branches or your mainline release. And that's quite good at finding other issues in the same area, but also providing a level of assurance. So the nice thing is, as these maturity models are saying, you don't need to try and find all the right tools first. This is a growth process. This is something that grows over time and gets better over time. And that flexibility, being able to change what is in our toolkit, what are we testing with, and what are we going to be able to tweak and turn up and dial down, this allows us to be able to make sure we're getting that right. So making that as easy as possible is very, very important. So just onto another slide that's going to describe some of the aspects around this here. The text has moved a wee bit on the slide, but there's certain cultural alignments that need to be kept in mind. A lot of techie vendors will concentrate on the technology, will concentrate on how a certain scanner is going to work, but we've got to remember it's people at the end of the day, and it's culture at the end of the day that's working here. And it's been one of the biggest challenges for DevSecOps is, as the name applies, getting these different teams with different agendas and different priorities to work together really efficiently. And as we've said, the technology, it's going to differ across teams. You might have certain teams that work in certain languages, certain platforms. Maybe some are moved on to containers, some aren't. Maybe some are moving on to different cloud systems. Maybe you've bought in a new company and they've got a completely different type of technology they work with. So how do you keep the process, the security process and automation as consistent, as repeatable as possible, but still allow the tech to differ for these different teams? And that's one of the aims of toolkits. How do you increase the return on investment? How do you make sure you've paid this money for these commercial tools, that you're getting the most use out of them? Typically that's down to making the process and the usage of those tools as simple as possible. In the bottom left here, it's a really interesting but nuanced point that we're discovering more and more as the industry moves on, is that different tools will work differently in real life. And what we mean by that is we've experienced of many customers who have used a certain tool with a certain profile on one of the repos, and it's quite efficient, finds lots of good issues, low false positive rate, it's quite good. But then inside the same company or even the same team, you have a different repo and those tools suddenly produce 80% false positives, a real high number of non-issues, and becomes a real weight to the team. And so sometimes just bedding these things in and doing a suck it and see type approach to understand, well, what is the actual performance of these tools across our projects, across our teams, and how can we easily say, you know what, for that project, this tool, even though it's great in other places, it's just not working for us here. How do we change that out and make that easy to change? Again, that's one of the areas we're aiming for with toolkits, because what you're looking to do here, and again, I've been a pen tester. I've turned up on the Mondays and had that approach where I want to find issues, and you're worried that if you don't find issues, you're not going to get, it be seen to be doing your job. Security assurance at the automation level is not a pen test. It's not paid by the issue. It's all about providing that level of assurance, and that usually comes from running the tools. So a nice nuanced area here is you actually want to be running the tools that provide the assurance, not just to find issues. So as an example there, if we were doing something manually here, if we were running 5 or 10 tools by Simon every Friday, that was their task. If there's certain tools that aren't typically returning issues, that's the first that's going to get dropped. They're going to skip that and be able to leave before 7 o'clock on a Friday because they want to get moved on with their weekend. But if you can easily collect these different tools to a place where they're grouped together and running automatically, you can have even the tools that aren't finding issues right now, you can have them providing that level of assurance so that down the line, when some bug does creep in, that those types of tools would find there hasn't been a cost, there hasn't been a wait to be able to run those checks. Toolkits have been able to make that life a whole lot easier. So that's kind of a description of the why of toolkits. We have a lot of tools we want to provide assurance on, a lot of different aspects, and technically and culturally, there's different challenges to be able to get them to work together, to make them easy to use and make them easy to change in our security programs. Now, what Martin's going to cover is how we've gone about with toolkits, creating a solution to that, and look forward to presenting that to you.
Thanks, Gary. So, yep, we're just going to talk about how everything, all the context that Gary's just kind of gone through around maturity and sort of incremental improvements to a security process, how we can put them to work. So the first piece we're going to look at is tool coverage. So Gary mentioned the breadth of tools that are out there in the market. This example looks at the ASPS control coverage of these common open source tools. You can see that if you're running each of them individually, you'd get a couple here and there. But if you were to mix them together, then you get a much increased coverage when it comes to looking at your ASPS stance. So that's really where really Uleska starts from, which is to get the coverage that you need to orchestrate all these multiple tools together. So that's where we start to come from, and then that's where toolkits start to bring them all together. The other side of a system, of an automation system like this, is these two fairly crucial sort of underpinning principles. So one is the system of record, So that's having a system be the first to see a security issue and also the first to assert that it's been resolved once that code has been pushed through. That gives an independent log of the current risk level of a particular piece of software or an application. And that's really good and really useful when it comes to prioritizing what risk a company is happy working with and where they need to apply resource to reduce that risk. The other side of this is separation of duties. And this speaks to what Gary mentioned earlier around who's configuring the tests, who's sourcing the tools versus who is running the tests, who's triaging the results, who's automating, who's bringing that into the development cycle. And that's one of the things that we are looking to certainly improve and double down on in the future. And Toolkits is an early part of that, which is really allowing that collaboration between the sort of development and DevOps side of the organization and the security side, and helping them collaborate at the bit where their sort of domains overlap. And that's what this diagram sort of speaks to. So on the left-hand side, we've got applications, tools, applications, code, containers, dynamically running applications. And you've got a team on the left-hand side who are going to know what languages are relevant for this application, what libraries when it comes to testing it, are there any particular vulnerabilities, any parts of the cloud platform that we need to be aware of, how quickly that app changes. So is it something that is largely dormant, or is it an application that changes every day, every hour, every week? How does it need testing? When does it need testing? How dynamic are potentially its upstream libraries? And then on the right-hand side, we've got the security team who are looking at the tools that are out there in the market. Do we have the right tools, both for our budget and for our platforms that are coming from the application side? Are we covering the right ASPS controls? Have we got the right selection of tools in use against the right applications? And then finally, how does that security team optimize that tool selection and configuration for different types of testing? And those types of testing could be static and dynamic. They could also be at different places through that software lifecycle. So for example, if you're building a toolkit to be used during a pull request, you might want that to run faster than maybe one that's the last step before the software goes out the door, where you maybe want a more belt and braces approach just to make sure that everything's been looked at before it leaves. So that overlap in the middle is the sort of the sweet spot, certainly where Uleska operates, and also where you get the best collaboration between the developers, the DevOps teams, and the security team in terms of making sure that we have an application that has been scanned by the right tools at the right time. So moving on to using the right tools for the job, I'm just going to switch quickly to an example organization which I have configured inside the Uleska platform. Just while I get this up and running, it's everything that you'll see in today's demo is part of our free tier. So everything you see, you can go to our website, sign up, and you can completely do for yourself. But this is an example of what Uleska looks like. So I'm logged in. I've got a repository. I've got WebGoat in here. And this is where we can start to test. So if I click the Test Now button, you can see we've got a mixture of toolkits to choose from. So we've got the Uleska toolkits at the top, and then we've got a couple of other toolkits that have been built by this company. So if we look at this Acme Corp General toolkit here, their security team has built this toolkit because of its kind of generic applicability across the applications and platforms that are in use in that organization. And there's a bit of guidance here from the team saying you should use this if there's not a platform or language specific toolkit for your application. So this is one route to starting a scan of an application with a toolkit, as I'll just click Start Scan here. The other route is to do it via a CI system or via our command line. I'm just going to jump across to an example of that here, and this is a GitHub action which uses our command line client, Uleska Automate, to test a particular repository with a particular toolkit. So you can see at the bottom here, if I can get rid of the scroll bar, doesn't want to go. Zoom in. There we go. So down here we've got the toolkit name, which is a particular toolkit. You pass that along when you are running the test, and that will essentially do the same thing as me clicking Start Scan on that particular toolkit. So in terms of what toolkits look like, we have a mixture of commercial and open source tools. They're all available for inclusion in any toolkit that you might want to build. We can see that this organization has created two here, a general toolkit, which we just discussed, and a pre-release toolkit, which is a bit more in depth. So it also brings in SonarQube at the bottom there. Now, this company have decided that in addition to this, they want to try and catch security issues that are being found by SemGrep and Whispers earlier in their development cycle. So what they want to do is they want to create a new toolkit that can be used in pull requests. So I'm just going to create Acme Corp PR toolkit. And we can see here that we've got all the tools that we could bring into this toolkit here. For this, we know that Acme Corp are mainly concerned with sort of the low-hanging fruit, the simple issues that are being caught by SemGrep and Whispers early on. So I'm going to add SemGrep in there. I'm also going to configure SemGrep to make sure that it has the rule sets that I'd like it to have: OWASP top 10, security audit, secrets, and I'm just going to add in CI just to make sure that that's covered as well, so I can save that. And then I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to find Whispers, add that as well, and then hit save. And that toolkit is now available for the DevOps team to integrate into the PR workflow, and they can call it from the CI system as it was with the command line. Now, the other improvement that I'm going to make today is that Acme Corp have managed to move the majority of their applications over to Docker. Now, a lot of their CI flows reference this pre-release toolkit, so they'll have toolkit name is pre-release toolkit baked into their CI configuration. Now, that's great because it means that these applications are always being put past this toolkit. But when it comes to changing it, toolkits really give us an advantage here, because if we wanted to add in a container scanning tool, now that we've completed our migration to containers, all I need to do is click Edit and find a container scanning tool. I'm going to use Claire, add that in, hit save, and now any existing CI flow that calls this toolkit will now also have Claire brought against it, just as it has any of the other tools. We've got SNCC, we've got SonarQube, Whispers, Chekhov, and Secrets. Any of all those other tools will continue to run. And in addition to that, Claire will also be run to check all those shiny new containers that are now making their way into the repositories. So once that CI flow is kicked off, once that test is started, the Uleska platform will pick all of the tools that are in this toolkit. We will spin up Docker containers. We'll spin up containers on our cloud infrastructure to run each of these. We'll pull down the Git code to pass to each of these in turn. And then we'll pull the container down and send it off to Claire to make sure that that container has been checked as well. So that's really the sort of the start and the middle and the end of toolkits. Is we've got these packages of config and tools which can be referenced through the UI for manual testing, or they can be referenced automatically through our CI and through our CLI. You can edit those, you can iterate on those toolkits to either add new toolkits if you found that there's maybe an opportunity to add in a bit more testing. You can optimize that toolkit for where it's going to sit in your development lifecycle, so you can pick quicker tools rather than maybe deeper tools, just to make sure that you're getting some kind of coverage over that. And then finally, when it comes to iterating and updating toolkits, you can quite easily swap new tools in and out just through here without needing to go in, pull apart any CI config or pull apart any existing kind of infrastructure. You can simply improve and iterate the toolkits from this one point.
So Martin, just to ask the question that actually has come up there on the questions from Mike Bittinger. Thanks for your question. Can the toolkits include commercial scanners?
Yep, thanks, Mike. Great question. So from the list of tools that we've got in each toolkit, Toolkits can include our open source tools, and yes, they can include commercial tools. So if I scroll down here, we'll find Fortify, which is a commercial tool, which X-Ray, again, which is a commercial tool. What else have we got in here? We've got Vericode down at the bottom here. And what we do with these commercial tools is we sort of store your configuration, whether that's a username and an access token or some other sort of tenant information, and we'll speak to Vericode on your behalf. So we'll take the code down, we will package it up, and we'll send it off in the right format that each of these platforms expects. We'll keep polling those platforms, particularly where they're cloud platforms, and wait for them to complete. And then we'll pull those results back, and they'll appear alongside any other tools that you've got in that toolkit. In addition to that, you can also bring in any custom tools that you've got. So if Gary mentioned earlier that there's often some bits of scripting that just aren't covered by an open source or a commercial tool, you can upload those into the platform here. They're Docker containers. There's a load of documentation about how to put them together and what environment variables we can provide you with, and there's helper libraries to format the results. And once you've uploaded those, we approve that, and then any custom tools will appear in this list alongside the open source tools and alongside the commercial tools. So you can pull that in to any toolkits, any new or existing toolkits that you want to use, whether that's currently full of commercial tools or currently full of open source tools. We treat them all as equals in the platform.
Yeah, and we've seen that come in to be very handy, both as I mentioned earlier on, from responses from penetration tests or maybe scripts or whatever you already have. You know, we haven't shown it here. There'll be videos online that could show you how to add the custom toolkits in, and you know, you get an icon of Tigger from Winnie the Pooh if you wanted. You can put it in with a couple of lines of Python, and suddenly it's then rolled out to everybody using that toolkit who needs to apply that check. So that's quite a good extensible feature, especially for companies that already have you know, tools or scripts that they're using. Another question's come in here from Jeff. Thanks, Jeff. Is it possible to get a report of the total ASPS control coverage, detail which controls are covered or not covered? I can deal with that one, or you can.
No, I was just beginning to wonder if Jeff can see the roadmap over my shoulder. But yeah, go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, so right now we can show you the ASPS coverage of issues that are there. So for anybody who's not aware, that you can teach the Uleska system the ASPS categories of the various issues that are returned by the various tools you run. And that's great. If you can just, you maybe wouldn't have anything in this demo system, but you can start then seeing graphs or charts or donut charts of the vulnerabilities that are most commonly coming up. I think we show the top 5 most common ASPS categories. That simply just allows you to see, right, well, this is what's actually happening. This, you know, with this, maybe do a brown bag session or a training course on authentication 211 or whatever that aspect's going to be. But as Martin mentioned there about the roadmap, you're very right. There's work you can do. Oh, thanks. You're showing the so this is a kind of donut chart of existing vulnerabilities that have been found, and that's not Jeff. I'm very well. That's not exactly the question you're asking. Just showing that that's some of the categorization we do according to ASPS, and that's good to see what's there. So to what Jeff's asking in terms of overall with the tools that we're going to choose to put in, is there any way to understand, against something like ASPS or a security standard like that, what areas of those security standards could be, or that their checks exist for within the tools we're choosing? And that's, as Martin mentioned, something we're bringing in to the platform. There's a few other aspects we're doing there as well, which, you know, stay tuned. We've got some other cool things coming out in that area. But that's simply a way of saying, yes, out of the, say, 280 aspects of something like OWASP ASPS standard. So imagine an Excel spreadsheet top to bottom with the 280 different aspects. If I choose tools A, B, D, and, you know, Z, what aspects of code what aspects of ASPS are they covering for us? That's something we're looking to build in and looking to bring into the system, because that really helps when you're doing that initial stage of trying to work out what tools do I want to bring in to my initial toolkits. But also, as you're system and your program is maturing, and maybe if you keep on in, say, your penetration testing, finding that the automation layer isn't finding authentication issues or third-party issues, or C++, out of bounds, issues, you can start then thinking, right, well, I need a tool then that's going to be able to plug that gap. And that's something that would happen over time then, is you would layer up the different tools you're going to have in your automation layer, so that you're getting as much coverage you can of something like the ASPS or NIST, 853, whatever it is, whatever the standards you're going to use. So great question, and as Martin mentioned, that's something we have in the roadmap. Okay, great. Well, great, Tim. And I see Mark's just asked a question. Thanks, Mark. If an issue is found in a single target, app, or URL using multiple tools within a toolkit, can that be correlated so information is additive, rather than duplicated? Martin, do you want me to let you handle that question?
Yeah, sure. So, Mark, the short answer is yes. Is that if we find the same issue with multiple tools, then we'll deduplicate that, and we'll try and get the best version or the best kind of collection of signals into that vulnerability that we report back as we can. In terms of correlating it from code to URL, that's not like linking the static and the dynamic side. That's something that's very much on our future roadmap. But for the moment, we treat kind of those sets of tools separately. But yes, we don't. We're well aware that a lot of these tools can throw up duplicate issues. They can throw up very similar issues, and we've got a whole system of false positive kind of classification, such that you can tune those to your particular platform or to your particular risk appetite over time. So we do some duplication removal based on, in fact, I don't know why I'm talking it through, I can just show you. So we do a number of, so where we go into, let's look at these results. So in this example, if we go into bulk operations, we've got two different modes we can move into. We've got duplication mode. So if there are issues that you think are duplicates that we haven't automatically detected as duplicate, then you can tell us, and we'll suppress those or we'll merge them into the future. False positive mode is very similar. If you go into false positive mode and tell us that a particular vulnerability is a false positive, again, we'll suppress that in subsequent runs. We don't kind of spirit them away. They'll live in this invalid vulnerabilities table. So you can always go back and audit them, and you can undo their either duplication or you can undo their false positive and bring them back into the list of vulnerabilities. But in terms of managing the output from those multiple tools, we do some automated deduplication, and then we give you a couple extra tools on top of that to manage what's coming out of those collections of tools.
And yeah, this is really handy with the fact that many of the commercial tools will have, not all, but many will have some way of handling false positives, and most open source tools won't. They're a command line tool, or they've got a simple enough UI that allows you to find issues. So the question of being able to handle false positives does become a pain point. Even if you have commercial tools that do it, if you have to go to 4 or 5 or 6 different commercial tools and use their UIs or whatever in different ways to be able to mark things as false positive, that in itself becomes a pain. So this single pane of glass way to do it, because we're getting the vulnerabilities from all the various tools returned to our single database, does make life easier. And as Martin said, if you have an issue that comes back that's a false positive or a duplicate, you mark it in Uleska, and then the next time you run the same toolkit, even if you added in other tools, it's going to come back and still recognize that was previously a duplicate, that was previously a false positive. I'm going to mark that away into the invalid vulnerabilities. And this means then this list that Martin's showing you right now, it becomes your sort of real security backlog of issues that need to be dealt with. The risk, or if you printed up a PDF, or if you looked at this list returned to the CLI and your CI/CD, that's the list you're going to see of what's considered real vulnerabilities. And Martin's showing here a demo example which has a number of maybe 10, 20 in the real list and 4 or 5 in the invalid. But definitely worked with the clients who have hundreds of issues in their invalid vulnerabilities. They've triaged and they've realized that's just non-issues. We either have protections against them, or the logic was incorrect and it's not really a flaw, or it's a duplicate, etc. And that becomes part of their value, part of their assets, the fact that they're able to keep those invalid vulnerabilities from coming up all the time and keep their real list somewhere else. Previously this would have been done by spreadsheets, by somebody on a Friday having to bring all this together and having to remember from last time what was a false positive. So we're automating that status for you. And as Martin's mentioned, there is aspects in the logic for toolkits to make sure that as you move up and down the tools that are in the toolkit, that the false positives and duplicates, the context of that is kept, because that becomes really valuable over time. Okay. If there's any other questions, please, there is a modal on the right-hand side here where I think you can ask any questions. Is there anything else, Martin, you wanted to cover in the meantime? Of course.
No, it's just the information slides at the end. So, yeah, as I mentioned at the start of the demo, everything that you've seen me do is part of our free tier. So please go sign up at uleska.com for a free account. There's plenty of documentation to view on there. There's previous webinars that talk about different toolkits, that talk about top 10 ways to manage security. There's a whole load of really useful content under the resources tab on the website. And then, yeah, hop across, sign up, and you can play with toolkits just as I've done. We are on Twitter. We're very active on LinkedIn. And you can always get in touch with either Gary or I direct, or through our hello@uleska.com email address. So yeah, any last questions?
Yeah, and as Martin has just said, this is all available on the free tier of our system. You can log on and try it out. There are a number of connectors there for open source tools. So we have a lot of people who log in, try it against something like WebCode or some other deliberately vulnerable library out there, so they can just get a feel for the system and understand how to use the default toolkits that come with the system, how to make their own, how to switch that up and down. And it really becomes an easier way of working. And if you do have your own commercial tools, you can look at our documentation. There's plenty of examples there of how to hook up what we call the connections between the Uleska system and your SNCC instance, or your account, or your Fortify on Demand or Veracode account, etc. And that allows you then to be able to easily centralize what those various open source and commercial tools are doing for your testing cycle. And if you're interested in knowing more about the commercial tools and how you can bring those in for your specific checks, as I said, there are videos on our YouTube channel. There's documentation on our documentation pages, and reach out to any of us and we could happily take you through that there, because it's quite a cool extension feature that allows you to build on top of these toolkits and range that out. Because as Martin says, what we see is you typically have groups of companies and teams who select their toolkits and have that rolled out, and that just sits there in their CI/CD pipeline as they're continually running. And then the security team get to tweak the profiles or get to add in more tools as happens. Something like Log4Shell was an interesting example where suddenly across a number, hundreds or thousands of projects, you wanted to check out if a certain problem existed in those repos, if you had a certain older version of the Log4j library, and being able to drop that in as a toolkit into the toolkit and have it automatically run against those thousands of projects without too much overhead really can be a powerful feature whenever you're rolling this out across large organizations. So if there's any other questions, please let us know. I think we're going to get kicked out in 1 minute anyway. So Martin, is there any last words from yourself?
No, just thanks for coming along and thanks for the questions. They're really good questions.
Thanks very much, everybody. This session will be online. It will be put on our YouTube channel. There's also plenty of previous webinars and sessions we've done, which have been not so much product related for ourselves, to be more about describing the problem and the challenges around the DevSecOps world. So please feel free to check those out. And if you have any questions, as Martin said, reach out to us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, at hello@uleska.com, and we'll look forward to talking to you in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, folks.